Chris Bryant, Senior Pastor here. Thanks so much for joining us in worship today. We never take your attendance for granted, and I never take your attendance for granted. Thank you for being here today. It was my third sermon here, third Sunday back in early August, when I preached a message on turning the page. And that was a finale of a 3-week message theme on how our lives are like a story. We have a story to tell. And by making the analogy of our lives to that of a book or a story, the idea was, of course, that there are times in which we must turn the page to embrace the next chapter of our life, whether we're ready for it or not, whether we like it or not. And those transitional moments, those transitional seasons, when life can no longer be the same as it has been, can be holy moments. They can be holy times. Our spirituality can take root in those times, those seasons. And if we have the emotional maturity, we can understand and acknowledge that those times when we have to turn the page are really, really critical and important. As a matter of fact, the better we are at doing it, the more likely the better we are in general. Now, we can look for evidence of God, as I said, in those times, and we can trust God to lead us into the next chapter. Today's message is kind of a follow-up to that. It's a part 2, if you will. Now, we're on a different theme now, but nonetheless, it would be a back end to that message we started back in early August. We've been talking a lot about in September the idea that life has so much uncertainty to it. It's something that we live with. It's normal. It's expected. It's not necessarily welcome, but life is full of inconsistencies. Whether we're talking about the turbulent teen years or other parts of the growing process or later on the aging process, or the infinite number of things that we could point out any given day that we feel are reliable, and yet that day they're not, right? Life has this uncertain quality to it. And of course, if you talk about the tragic, trauma, things that would devastate our sense of stability in general, of course, that is in the realm of the uncertain. None of us are promised tomorrow. And we live with that uncertainty. And sometimes we're more aware of that than others. Where is God in all of this? That's what we're asking. How can I have a faith that hangs tough? How can my faith help me hang tough in the midst of such uncertain circumstances that I can expect throughout my life? Well, sometimes we need to step back and see the big picture. That's how we started this theme with. Sometimes you got to step back and see the big picture. And then sometimes, what I shared last week, you have to embrace change as not always being the enemy. Sometimes change is a really good thing. Today, I want to, again, turn to, similar to the idea of turning the page, I want to go to and speak on how we handle these inconsistencies, in part by sometimes letting go. By letting go, and yet by faith, we can stay hopeful. Letting go and staying hopeful, which is ironic because in certain circumstances, when the uncertainty is a particular type, letting go feels hopeless. And so it's ironic to us that we would ever feel hope, ever gain hope from doing something that seems so hopeless. I had to let go of my marriage, a 20-year marriage, and 3 children that came with it, the dream of being a family, the dream of being an extended family like my maternal grandparents were an example to me of, something that I desired. I had to let that go. That was the darkest period of my life. I was broken. And I'll share more with you in the months and years ahead. But for today, I just want to say, as bad as it was, as much counseling as it took, as many, many, many conversations as I had to have with trusted friends and mentors and prayer partners, it was only in letting go. It was only in letting go that I started to feel hopeful again. I had to let go of a church that I started from scratch, and all the memories and all the aspirations and all the challenges that came with it, all that hard work and sacrifice. A church that, truth to be told, was so intertwined with my own faith journey, it was hard at times to separate the two, me and the church. I put everything I had into that church, thinking it would be the greatest work of my life. And leaving that community after 14 years was so hard. It felt so empty, and I was terribly fearful and uncertain about my future. But here we are a little over 6 years later, and now in my second church since, it turns out my best work is still ahead. And it didn't take me 6 years to figure that out. As a matter of fact, as soon as I started letting go, I started to feel that hope. Actually, my best work is still ahead. I've had to let go of a lot of things. I've had to let go of my 3 biological children, my 3 sons. Now, 2 of those 3 are over 18 and they've moved on, but the other is still 14. But none of them currently live under my roof. And that happened a little sooner than I thought. But I've had to let that go. I've had to let go of my dad, who passed away 3 years ago this Father's Day. He passed away 7 weeks after Kara and I had gotten married. I had to let go. I have to let go of a house in Ringgold, Georgia. Ringgold in all places, goodness. But nonetheless, it was the first home I ever had that was truly filled with joy. It was the home that I'd always kind of imagined having as a young man. It's time to let go, though. You know about this. I'm up here talking, but I'm not surprising you with anything. You know exactly what I'm saying. You have plenty of examples yourself. You know that in life, you have to let go. You have to let go. But do we let go with faith? Because if we let go in faith, we can stay hopeful, even if the choice of letting go feels hopeless. Do we have the faith? Do we have the spirituality to enable us to stay hopeful in those times? What I want to do now is to turn to 2 Kings chapter 2 and read a story that I think addresses these very things. I'm going to be reading verses 1 through 16, so it's a long passage, but just hang with me, okay? 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 16. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied. "So be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. And the company of the prophets of Jericho went up to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied. "So be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. And Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and he struck the water with it. "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. The company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, "The spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha." And they went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. "Look," they said, we your servants have 50 able men. Let them go and look for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has picked him up and set him down on some mountain or in some valley." "No," Elisha replied. "Do not send them." This is God's scripture given for us, we God's people, and we say thanks be to God. Let's pray. Help us today, O Lord, to receive your word of life and be renewed by it. Speak, Lord. Your servants are listening. Amen. Now, I don't normally get emotional about Old Testament stories or too many Old Testament stories, but this one is an exception. This story has no parallel. It is the only story of an immediate and direct prophetic succession in the Bible. Elijah is a spiritual giant, second only in importance to Moses. You'll remember that it is he and Moses that appear at the Transfiguration in the New Testament, where Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, and they go up to the mountain, and Jesus is transfigured before them, and there they see two figures, one to the right and the left. One is Moses, and the other is Elijah. Moses representing the law, Elijah representing all the prophets. So this story isn't just about Elisha saying goodbye to his master. It's a story about Israel saying goodbye to a living legend. The story combines the same kind of intimate tone in relational commitment and loyalty as a much older story that we find in the Bible, a story called Ruth, about Ruth and Naomi. But here, the expression of that loyalty and relational commitment isn't about ongoing survival by being together, as is the story of Ruth and Naomi. This instead is a story of finality. The intimacy that is being expressed here is a reluctance to say goodbye when goodbye must be said. We are left to wonder how best to describe this relationship between Elijah and Elisha. Is it in fact apprentice to master? Those around refer to Elijah as Elisha's master. But then you have this wonderful phrase that Elisha says as Elijah is taken. My father, it indicates maybe more intimacy. Is this perhaps more like a spiritual father to a spiritual son? Or maybe a better analogy is a spiritual big brother to a spiritual baby brother. Well, however it is, it's more than just a working relationship. These are more than just colleagues. These are more than just friends even. There seems to be a kinship, a connection shared by only them. And now the time has come, and the future has never looked so uncertain as now. Elijah is leaving, is dying, is being taken. It's a bit of a mystery. But somehow Elisha knows it, and others know it. And Elisha acknowledges this understanding with an equal disdain of interest in talking about it. Yes, I know. Hush. I'm not in the mood. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about my feelings. I'm pretty plain about my feelings are. I don't like this. To this, we might add low self-esteem, or at the very least, a definitive and acute uncertainty about himself. Elijah thinking uncertain whether he is actually capable of following in the footsteps of Elijah. Is he in fact chosen by God? Or maybe he was merely just chosen by Elijah. Maybe Elijah likes him more than God does. What am I going to do? What's going to happen now? Elisha is uncertain. Perhaps Elijah has thought too much of him. And now what? You've been in situations like this. It may not seem so on the surface, but you are, I'm sure, aware of a scenario, a situation where you thought to yourself, what now? I can't do this. This isn't my job. I'm not capable. I don't want to do that. I'm not ready. I'm so empty if you're not going to be here with me. I feel so lost without you. I don't know what to do. This can't happen. Elisha's request for a double portion of Elijah's spirit is an indicator of this uncertainty. Now, from our cultural perspective, when we hear Elisha say, give me a double portion of your spirit, in our culture, bigger is always better. And so we think, this is great, He's asking, let me be twice the prophet as you. But in truth, in Elisha's culture, this statement is not an example of confidence, but the lack thereof it. It is a reference to inheritance. When a father dies and there are more than one son, if there's more than one son, if there are two sons, well, then the inheritance is not split 50-50. It is split 2/3 and 1/3. The older son receiving the double portion. Elisha is asking for reassurance about his role and his identity. Am I really your spiritual son? Am I really supposed to take over? Am I really to continue the ministry you started? Now, Elijah cannot give Elisha the certainty that he wants. He does offer a potential sign. And he says, if you see this particular sign, you might know and believe that God is with you, just as God has been with me, that God has called you, just as God has called me. And Elisha sees it. And yet, the uncertainty remains. I can relate. I can see evidence of God. I can look and see where God might be in my life here and there, and this problem or that, through these things or this difficulty. And yet, in the midst of even seeing such evidence, I can still find it hard to believe, hard to have hope about a future that things are going to be okay. I can relate to that. I can relate to how other people see much more clearly than me in the midst of whatever it is that I'm going through and experiencing. They talking to me and trying to show me evidence that they see in my life. Look, this is where God is. Can't you see this? Trust me, it's going to be okay, and this and that. And while I'm not stupid, I can understand everything they say, and yet their confidence doesn't automatically translate to me having confidence. I'm still wondering what's going to happen. I love that Elisha asked the question with the cloak of Elijah in hand, having seen the sign that he did, and yet he asks, where is the God of Israel in all of this? Isn't that what we're asking this month? Isn't this the idea of uncertainty? Where's God? Where's God in the midst of our not knowing for sure? Where's God? Can faith help us hang tough? Elisha acts in faith. He takes this mantle, strikes the water in the same way that Elijah did, and it parts, just like it did for Elijah. And those that see it recognize, as Elisha does himself, that this means he is indeed now to be the prophet of Israel. The transition has been made. As hopeless as it feels, he is alone. Elijah is gone. And yet, in this moment, he's acted in faith, and brand new hope begins to emerge. In the words of the 90s band Semisonic in their most famous song, Closing Time, every new beginning is some other beginning's end. Prophetic words, if I've ever heard them. It's ironic. It's ironic. And yet, by faith, we can let go, as hopeless as letting go feels, and in doing so, we gain new hope for a future, a calling, a life yet to be revealed. I love how others ask Elisha, can they go and search? They try, well, maybe he's not really gone. Maybe the Spirit of the Lord simply just took him somewhere else. We'll go look for him, Elisha. We'll go look for your master if you want. No, don't go look for him. It's time to let go. Elisha wasn't ready to let go at Bethel. He wasn't ready to let go at Jericho. He wasn't ready to let go at the Jordan. But Elijah is gone. He has to let go. And in letting go, as hopeless as that feels, by faith, he can also begin to feel hope where he couldn't before. Hope for a future that he couldn't see before. If you read the story a bit further, you'll discover that those that offered to do this for Elisha actually go and search for Elijah. And they come back, of course, empty-handed. And Elisha says, I told you so. I told you so. Yeah. I told you so. It takes letting go of the past, no matter how good or how painful it is, in order to embrace the future. And to be clear, embracing the future doesn't mean abandoning the great memories and all what's happened in the past. Embracing the future doesn't mean that we can't honor what's happened. Embracing the future also doesn't mean that we have to stop thinking or talking about what happened to us, the trauma that we went through. It doesn't work like that. We humans don't work like that. No, embracing the future simply means recognizing that we have to move on in some form or fashion. And we do this by faith. And this is really important. We do this by faith. It's very important because faith isn't certainty. Faith is not certainty. And I have to say that this morning because too many Christians nowadays talk about belief and faith as if it is. It's faith. Faith is what we have despite the uncertainty around us. Faith is what we have despite the uncertainty we feel within us. But unfortunately, a lot of churches and Christians nowadays, they say the words faith and belief, but if you listen to the context, they might as well just say certainty. And that's why doubts and questions to these folks are so problematic. Personally, I feel it's very close to religious abuse. Friends, it's called faith for a reason. Our spirituality is about using faith because we don't have certainty. Being spiritual doesn't mean we ignorantly deny the reality of an uncertain future. Faith is what we use despite it. That's how we get through it. It doesn't make uncertainty magically go away, but it does unlock new hope for a future not yet realized. It takes faith. It takes faith to accept one's calling and one's responsibility, to believe the same God is with you that was with people you admire. It takes faith to believe the people that have inspired you, that you look up to, the people that you think, wow, they have it all together or whatever it is because of their spirituality. It takes faith to believe that it's the same God working in your life as in theirs, even though you feel they're so much greater than you. It takes faith to believe that God has something good for you when the present, with its loss and the pain you've had, the difficulties, is so hard. It takes faith to believe it's really your time to lead, despite how you feel, despite how unprepared and qualified you think you are. No, by faith, not certainty, by faith. It's your time. It's your time. And it's by faith that we also realize it's time to step aside and let someone else take the lead. It's by faith, not certainty. In times of uncertainty, we must ask, can I trust God for something that looks so different than what I've seen in the past? This trust, despite the uncertainty, is faith. And when we let go, as hopeless as that can feel, because of all the feelings, emotions attached to whatever it is that we need to let go, as hopeless as that can feel, to our great surprise, by faith as we let go, not only do we keep the little hope we already had, we end up experiencing more of it. By faith in God, despite our uncertainty, we can let go and stay hopeful. Later, the same phrase that Elisha uses when he sees Elijah taken from him in the whirlwind, my father, that same phrase is used by a king of Israel to reference Elisha. And you know, when Elisha said that in that moment to Elijah, I bet he could never imagine anyone would ever say something like that about him, that no one would ever express what he was expressing to Elijah. And yet, it did. It did. That's just how it works, isn't it? We are so uncertain. And yet every generation, every person must do our best, inspired by those who have gone on before us, trusting that God is making us also into examples and inspiration for others, maybe even the next generation, people who may say things and say things about us and see in us things that we would never see in ourselves. This we have by faith, not certainty. So we can let go and have hope. I'll end today with a very simple illustration. I almost did not include it because it's a serious message, and I trust that you here are dealing with all manner of serious things in your life. And yet it's still a good example, so we'll give it a shot. In the previous church that I served, the biggest room in the church, besides the sanctuary and a multi-purpose room, an adult classroom, the biggest room was occupied by the smallest Sunday school class. This particular Sunday school class had been in that room since the building was made. It was the largest room, and way back when, they were the class. They were the class, right? I mean, they were the ones, they were the meat, the strength, the muscle of the church. They were the ones that had the kids of all ages, and now there's just this small little group of them that meets there every week, dwindling in size, and the size of the room reminding them every week of what they once were, but are no more. Well, we had another class that was needing that space, and I thought, well, this is going to be challenging to invite them to consider moving. I mean, it was frozen in time. It looked just like whatever year it was in the 70s. It looked just like it did then. I mean, And yet, to my surprise, they were very willing. They didn't hesitate. Well, they hesitated a little. They hesitated a little. But I was shocked at how quickly they got together and talked about it and said, it's time to let go. It's time to move on. And they went across the hallway to one of our smallest classrooms, and it was interesting. They discovered quickly, we kind of like this better. And not only did they like it better, but within a few weeks, they started growing. As a matter of fact, it wasn't long that they started to have to pull chairs from other rooms into that little room for all the new people that had started coming. It's amazing when we let go by faith, the hope we can feel. Even though letting go, boy, it hurts. It is like, it doesn't feel very hopeful. And yet, if we act in faith, not certainty, it's faith. If we act in faith, all of a sudden we'll begin to feel hope that we didn't feel before because we hadn't acted in faith, and we all of a sudden now, a future that we couldn't see begins becoming possible.